The sun hung low over Dry Creek, spilling molten gold across the brittle grass and weather-beaten fences. Heat shimmered off the dust, making the world look like it was swaying. Eli Carter stood in the yard outside the tiny clapboard chapel, hands buried deep in the pockets of his only suit, which fit him about as well as a horse blanket on a mule. The stiff collar scratched his neck, and the creak of his boots seemed to echo louder than the wind. Inside, he could hear the low hum of voices, neighbors, shopkeepers, maybe even the blacksmith's wife, all here to witness what they would no doubt call the strangest bargain in town history. The deal was simple enough: marry a woman he'd never met and walk away with a prize milk cow. Simple, and yet, here he was sweating like a sinner in Sunday school, wondering if there was a word for the kind of man who traded his future for livestock. Pride had been the first thing to go. The drought had killed half his herd, debt had taken the rest. The bank was already sniffing at his land like a coyote catching the scent of blood. A single cow meant milk, trade, and maybe, just maybe, keeping the ranch afloat long enough for the rains to come. That thought alone kept him rooted to the spot, though the weight of his decision pressed against his chest like a stone. The chapel door creaked open, and the man who stepped out wore the expression of someone sealing a deal he'd been eager to be rid of. Silas Mayfield, a rancher from the far side of the canyon, was as broad as a barn door and twice as weathered. His voice carried like gravel rolling in a tin pan. "She's ready," he said, glancing at Eli with the faintest flicker of something, pity, maybe, or warning. "We'll do this quick." Eli swallowed hard and followed him inside. The air smelled faintly of lilac water and dust, an odd mix that clung to the wooden pews. At the far end stood the bride, Martha Mayfield, her frame filling out a white dress that might have been lovely once but now bore the wrinkles of a long wait. Her dark hair was wound tight beneath a modest veil, but it wasn't her size that caught him, it was her eyes. Sharp, watchful, the kind of eyes that measured a man and decided whether he was worth the trouble. She didn't smile. Neither did he. The preacher cleared his throat, starting the vows in a voice that sounded worn down from marrying too many couples who didn't quite belong together. Eli answered when he was supposed to, though the words felt strange in his mouth. Martha's responses came crisp and even, like each one was measured before she let it go. The townsfolk sat in silence, their curiosity heavy enough to bend the air. Somewhere near the back, someone coughed. When it came time to seal the union, Martha placed her hand in his. Her grip was firm, almost testing, as if she wanted to know whether his callous palm matched the kind of man she needed him to be. There was no lingering look, no shy blush, just a nod, as though they had struck a business arrangement and nothing more. Silas clapped Eli on the shoulder after the final amen. "Cows in the corral," he said, and with that, the man was gone, leaving behind the scent of tobacco and something heavier, finality. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched long shadows across the street. Martha stood beside him, her veil now pushed back, revealing a scar that curved pale against the darker skin near her wrist. Eli noticed the way she kept her back to the street, glancing over her shoulder more than once. Folks passing by slowed to stare, their expressions caught somewhere between amusement and disbelief. He didn't blame them. A man marrying for a cow was a spectacle worth chewing on for weeks. They made the walk toward his wagon without much talk. He offered to help her climb in. She refused with a shake of her head, hoisting herself up with surprising ease. The wagon creaked under the weight of silence as they rolled out toward the ranch. The land stretched wide and empty, the sky a sheet of pale fire bleeding into the horizon. Eli tried to think of something to say, but words seemed as scarce as rain. Finally, he asked, "You ever been out this way?" No, her tone was flat, but there was something underneath it, an edge he couldn't name. "You'll find it quiet," he said. "I like quiet," she replied, though her eyes kept scanning the trail behind them. They reached the ranch just as the sun dipped low, setting the fence posts ablaze in orange light. The place wasn't much, 2 weathered buildings, a lean-to for the tools, and the small corral where the cow waited. The animal lifted its head as they passed, chewing slow as if it knew exactly what it had been traded for. Eli almost laughed at the thought, but Martha's face stayed unreadable. He helped her down from the wagon this time, and she didn't resist. Inside the cabin, the air was cooler, smelling faintly of cedar and the faint tang of oil from the lamp on the table. She took in the space with a single sweeping glance. "You live alone?" she asked. "Always have," he said. She nodded once, as though filing that away. He poured them each a small glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. She took hers without a word. They drank in silence, the sound of the cow lowing in the distance filling the gaps where conversation might have been. After a time, she rose, excused herself, and stepped into the small bedroom. He figured she was tired from the day, maybe just needed space. He busied himself stoking the fire, his mind circling around the fact that he'd married a woman whose voice he'd heard less than a dozen times. When he finally went to the bedroom door, intending to say goodnight, he found it closed. He gave a gentle knock. No answer. Another, louder this time. "Long day," came her voice from inside, steady but distant. "Best we get some sleep." He hesitated, hands still on the wood. "Sure," he said, though the word tasted uncertain. The latch clicked from the other side. Eli stood there a moment longer, listening to the wind outside and the quiet breathing beyond the door. He told himself it didn't matter, not tonight, maybe not ever. He had the cow. He had a chance to keep the ranch. That was the bargain. Still, as he turned away, he couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted in the air, something unspoken settling between them like a shadow. And as the fire died down to embers, he found himself wondering, not for the first time, if the price of that cow was far steeper than he had yet to reckon. The night air settled cold over the ranch, the wind dragging its fingers across the tin roof and making the boards groan. Eli sat by the fire with his boots off, toes stretched toward the fading warmth. The cabin felt larger than it should have, every creak and shift of the timber echoing in the empty space between him and the locked bedroom door. The whiskey glass beside him was still half full, but the burn of it no longer seemed to do much good. He'd knocked twice more since she'd shut herself in. The first time she'd answered with silence, the second with a calm, "Go on to sleep." He didn't like the way her voice had sounded, polite, even, but as final as a slammed gate. The cow lowed from the corral, the sound muffled by distance. He tried to focus on that simple fact: he had the cow now. A milk cow meant a chance to see winter through without leaning on the bank or begging favors from neighbors. That was the deal, and it was done. But even as he told himself so, his eyes drifted back to the thin strip of light under the bedroom door, as if answers might seep out with the glow. A coyote yipped somewhere beyond the ridge, the sound chased by another, closer one. Eli leaned forward, listening. Coyotes were nothing new, but there was something in the rhythm, quick bursts of noise followed by sudden silence, that prickled at him. He stood, went to the window, and pushed the curtain aside. The moon was a pale coin hanging over the land, washing everything in a silver glow. The corral stood quiet, the cow a dark shape against the fence. Beyond that, nothing moved. He stayed there a moment longer, eyes straining to pierce the distance, before letting the curtain fall. The boards near the bedroom creaked. Not the kind of sound you made pacing, but slow and deliberate, as if someone was leaning against the floorboards just enough to make them whisper. He thought about knocking again, but something held him still. Instead, he stirred the fire, coaxing it back to life. The warmth gave him little comfort. He poured the rest of the whiskey, drained it, and sat in the flickering light. His thoughts kept circling to the same point: she hadn't locked that door out of shyness. There'd been something else in her voice, something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with whatever she'd brought with her to his ranch. When the wind picked up, it carried with it another sound, distant, muffled, but steady. Hooves. Slow, deliberate, more than one set. Eli froze, head cocked toward the door. They weren't close, not yet, but the land out here didn't carry travelers at night unless they had a reason. He moved to the window again, careful not to let his shadow fall across the glass. Out there, far beyond the fence line, three shapes materialized out of the moonlight. Riders. They weren't headed toward the main road but angling toward the back of the property, the route someone would take if they wanted to go unseen. Eli stepped away from the window and crossed to the bedroom door. His knock was sharper this time. "Martha," he said low, "we've got company." Her answer came quick. "Don't open the door." He frowned, pressing closer. "They're headed this way." "I know," she said, and the firmness in her tone was like iron. "Stay away from the windows." The words crawled under his skin. He wasn't used to being told to stay put on his own land, and yet, something in her voice made him obey without thinking. The hoofbeats grew louder, slowing as they reached the edge of the property. Eli's hand went to the rifle leaning by the door. He slid the bolt back, the soft click loud in the stillness. Through the thin walls, he could hear the riders now, quiet murmurs, the shuffle of tack, the muted jingle of a bit. They didn't approach the cabin. Instead, they circled, the sound of hooves moving around the house, deliberate and slow, like wolves testing a fence. The cow shifted uneasily in the corral, its low call breaking the night air. Eli kept the rifle steady, breath tight in his chest. He waited for the knock, the shout, the crack of a gunshot, but none came. The riders lingered just beyond the edge of the lantern light, moving from one side of the house to the other, then back again. And then, as suddenly as they'd come, they were gone. The hoofbeats faded into the distance, swallowed by the wind. Eli didn't move for a long moment. When he finally eased the rifle down, the silence seemed to press heavier than the danger had. He turned toward the bedroom, but the door remained shut, no sound from within. He could have demanded answers right then. Instead, he crossed back to the fire, tossed another log onto the coals, and sat with the rifle resting across his knees. His gaze wandered once more to that thin strip of light under the door. The wind shifted, rattling the shutters, but inside the cabin, nothing stirred. Somewhere out there in the dark, trouble had found his land. And it wasn't here for him. Not yet. Dawn crept across the plains in slow, pale strokes, brushing the frost from the dry grass and painting the sky in a bruised lavender. Eli had not slept. He sat at the table, coffee cooling in his hands, eyes fixed on the bedroom door. The latch clicked just after sunrise, and Martha stepped out as if nothing in the night had happened. She wore a plain cotton dress now, sleeves rolled high, hair braided tight. Without a word, she crossed to the stove and began slicing bacon. "You cook like you slept through it," Eli said. "Through what?" she replied, her tone as even as the knife tapping against the cutting board. "3 riders," he said, "circling the place like they owned it." She didn't look up. "They didn't come to the door, did they?" "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point," she said, dropping the bacon into the pan. The sizzle filled the space between them, sharp and loud. Eli set his coffee down. "You're gonna tell me why they were here?" Her hand stilled, but only for a heartbeat. "I'll tell you enough." She turned then, leaning against the counter, eyes meeting his. "They're not here for you. They're here for me. And they'll be back." The admission landed heavy, though part of him had known it already. "Why?" "Because they think I have something that doesn't belong to me." "And do you?" Her gaze flickered, just once, before she answered. "Not anymore." It wasn't enough, not by a long shot, but he saw something different in her then, an unease she couldn't mask. It wasn't fear exactly, more like someone weighing the cost of every word. He wanted to push harder, but the clatter of hooves cut the thought short. They were back. Eli moved fast, grabbing his rifle from beside the door. Martha didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into the cupboard and pulled out a revolver, the motion smooth, practiced. She spun the cylinder, checked the rounds, and slipped it into her hand like an old friend. "You gonna tell me how you shoot?" he asked. "You'll see," she said, and stepped to the window. Outside, the same 3 riders had returned, this time riding straight up the dirt track toward the house. Dust rolled up behind them, their hats pulled low, hands resting too easy near their holsters. The first shot came from the one in the middle, a sharp crack that splintered the top rail of the corral. The cow bawled and stomped. Eli fired back, the recoil snapping through his shoulder. Martha's revolver barked twice in quick succession, one bullet taking a chunk out of the nearest fence post, the other striking the rider on the left in the arm. He jerked in the saddle, swore, and veered away. They weren't here to kill quick. Eli could see it in the way they fired, probing shots meant to scare or flush someone out. But the look on the leader's face when Martha's bullet tore past his cheek was pure murder. The standoff stretched on for minutes that felt like hours. Eli and Martha ducked and rose in rhythm, each shot calculated, each movement spare. She was every bit the marksman she'd claimed, steady-handed and unshaken. Finally, the riders pulled back, the leader spitting into the dirt before turning his horse toward the ridge. They vanished over it, leaving behind the smell of gunpowder and churned earth. Eli leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "That was a damn sight better than the story you gave me." Martha holstered her gun, her expression unreadable. "You needed to know I can handle myself before I told you the rest." She moved to the table, pouring herself coffee as though they hadn't just exchanged bullets with strangers. "They're bounty hunters," she said finally. "The kind that'll ride 200 miles for the smell of coin." "And the coin's on you." She nodded. "For a robbery I didn't commit. My father did, but I'm the one on the posters. It keeps him safe. Keeps me running." Eli stared at her, trying to reconcile the quiet woman slicing bacon with the one who'd just driven off armed men. "So why marry me? Why here?" "Because my father said you were desperate enough to take the deal. And desperate men don't ask many questions." "That's so," he said, heat creeping into his voice. "It was the truth yesterday," she answered, "but not anymore." The words caught him off guard. He wanted to be angry, should have been, but instead he saw the way her fingers curled around the mug, white-knuckled. She'd been carrying this weight alone for longer than she'd admit. They spent the next hour patching the fence, side by side without much talk. The cow kept close to the far end of the corral, watchful. Every now and then, Martha's gaze would drift to the ridge, her mouth tightening. By midday, the sky had turned a flat, unforgiving blue, the kind that made distances blur. Eli set the hammer down and wiped his brow. "They'll be back," he said. She didn't argue. "Next time, they won't just circle." When they stepped back inside, he noticed her stool bag on the floor near the bed. It had been closed before, now it hung slightly open. Something white peeked out. He crouched, pulling the paper free. A wanted poster. The likeness was sharp, unmistakable. The words below read, *** Martha Mayfield, $500 dead or alive ***. Eli looked up. She was watching him from across the room, her eyes steady, no apology in them. "You keep that to remind yourself who you are," he said. "To remind myself who they think I am," she corrected. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, though whether from the draft or his own grip, he couldn't tell. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of hooves again, distant this time, but certain. Eli folded the poster, slid it back into the bag, and straightened. "Then we'd better be ready." The wind rose that evening, carrying the scent of rain and the metallic taste of a storm brewing far off over the hills. Clouds rolled in low and heavy, their bellies dark with the promise of thunder. Eli sat at the table cleaning his rifle, each slow pull of the cloth against the barrel measured and quiet. Across from him, Martha was loading her revolver, the steady click of each round sliding into place as deliberate as a prayer. "They'll come tonight," she said, not looking up. He didn't ask how she knew. Her certainty was a thing he'd stopped questioning, like the way the land turned gold before sunset or how the wind found every crack in the cabin walls. "Then we'll be ready," he said. By nightfall, the rain began to fall in thin needles, pattering against the roof. Lightning flashed, bleaching the room in white for a heartbeat before darkness swallowed it again. They'd doused the lanterns, choosing shadows over light. Eli sat by the front window, Martha by the back, both weapons within easy reach. The hoofbeats came late, later than he expected, but they were unmistakable. For this time, maybe 5, moving with the slow patience of men who had no need to hurry. The storm muffled their approach, but every few seconds lightning caught the gleam of wet saddles, the flash of metal at a belt. When they stopped, the silence was heavier than the thunder. A voice called out, low but carrying. "Martha Mayfield. Come out, and we can talk about the price." She didn't move. "They never want to talk," she murmured. Another voice, rougher, followed. "Ain't about talking. It's about collectin'." Eli's hand tightened on the rifle. He could see their shapes now, spread out in a half-circle. The leader sat tall in the saddle, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. His horse shifted, restless. The first shot broke the standoff, slicing the air just above the window frame. Eli answered with one of his own, the crack swallowed by thunder. Martha's revolver barked twice from the back of the cabin, the sharp report echoing against the hills. The fight was fast and vicious. Bullets tore through the siding, splintering wood and sending dust into the air. The rain turned to sheets, drumming against the roof, running in muddy rivulets across the yard. Eli moved between windows, firing, ducking, firing again. Martha stayed low, methodical, every shot placed with care. One rider went down in the mud, his horse bolting into the dark. Another pulled back, clutching his shoulder, but the leader stayed, driving his men forward. They closed in, shots hitting closer, louder. Lightning split the sky, and in that flash Eli saw the leader raise his pistol, aiming straight for the back window. "Martha!" he shouted, but she was already moving. She fired once, twice, the second shot dropping the man from his horse. He hit the ground hard, his weapon tumbling from his grip. The remaining riders hesitated, glancing at their fallen leader. That was enough. Eli stepped into the doorway, rifle leveled, his voice carrying over the rain. "You want her, you'll have to bury me first." For a moment, no one moved. Then one by one, the riders turned their horses and melted into the storm, their shapes fading until only the sound of the rain remained. Eli lowered the rifle, the weight of it heavy in his arms. He turned to find Martha standing in the doorway to the back room, her revolver hanging at her side. The lamplight caught the rain on her hair, the mud on her boots. "It's done," she said. "For now," he answered. They dragged the wounded leader into the barn, bound him, and left him for the sheriff in town. The storm passed slowly, leaving the air clean and cold. By morning, the ground steamed under the new sun, the mud thick and clinging. Over coffee, they sat at the table in a rare quiet. Eli studied her across the rim of his cup. "You could leave now," he said. "No one would blame you." She shook her head. "Running only works until someone catches up. I'm tired of running." He understood more than he cared to admit. Life on the edge of the law, or just beyond its reach, had a way of stripping a person down to the rawest parts. She wasn't asking for protection now. She was asking for a place she could stand without looking over her shoulder. Outside, the cow wandered near the fence, tail swishing lazily, utterly untouched by the chaos of the night before. Eli let out a dry laugh. "Funny thing," he said. "That cow's the reason you're here." Martha smiled, just faintly. The cow was an excuse. "You kept me here." The words sat between them, simple and unadorned, but carrying more weight than any vow spoken in the chapel. When he rose to take his cup to the sink, she added, "We'll have to fix the fences again. And you'll need more feed before winter." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, the kind people made when they intended to stay. Eli looked out over the land, the sky washed clean, the horizon sharp as a blade. He thought about the night before, the gunfire, the rain, the way she'd stood her ground without flinching. He thought about the quiet she said she liked, and how it might just suit them both. "A cow brought her to my door," he murmured, mostly to himself, "but it was her courage that kept her here." The day stretched ahead, full of work and the kind of peace that was always temporary in the West. But for now, it was enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.